Alrighty, let me properly qualify myself for this video first. I'm not going to take the bitch route and say that everything is just an opinion and you shouldn't take it too seriously. A good chunk of the stuff is things I genuinely believe or have been taught over the years. That being said, I've worked as an editor for tabloids, fiction magazines, in games, numerous failed projects due to director E.G.O, and have relevant university qualifications to be speaking on the quality of writing in games. I'm here to convince you of my viewpoints and elaborate on why I've reached this kind of ideation. First, let's go over a few sins of Project Moon's writing throughout their 3 titles. It's not an exhaustive list of all of them, but it is a short list of concepts I'd like to go over. First, we'll cover the trope of Planet of the Hats. This trope outlines the existence of societies or cultures that exist purely to elicit a single idea or concept. Everyone from that planet wears hats, just as everyone from that association must be overworked assassins. Normally, this works to reduce the nuances an audience needs to account for in regards to remembering a culture or society. It allows people to generalize and surmise concepts within worlds rather quickly. It can also severely dumb down the depth of such groups. While not every single group suffers from this in Project Moonworks, a lot of the fixer associations, corporations, and syndicates suffer from this. Sometimes this is for the sake of writing efficiency, since once a group is established, they can easily insert them into the narrative. But in other cases, it severely undersells the nuances and history of each as introduced. The easiest example I can point to is the Shi Association. Upon appearance in Ruina, there are a bunch of super competent, albeit overworked assassins. Many in the city would love for the removal of rivals or disposal of grievances. Plus, it makes sense for them to have a stupid amount of work. This is about as far as most people consider. Essentially a, haha, look, it's the overworked assassins that revolve around the number 4. That more or less defines the zeitgeist of the PM fanbase when it comes to these guys. The nuance being that the branch they're from in Ruina are deliberately overworked. It's thanks to the meddling of the higher-ups that Eugen's branch are always tired and never get a moment's rest. It's what causes a proud association like the Shi to bother hiring out the full-stop office to take a job they would have otherwise been able to take. Not something they would do lightly either. Eugen is looking for a promotion for her subordinates, some kind of light at the end of the tunnel. But due to internal politics, it's indefinitely stalled until the events taking place in the library and outside as their higher-up gets pasted. Their subordinates have a ridiculous amount of faith in her to boot. They're all making the best of a shitty situation, where rather than the meritocracy that feels just, they're shafted by internal affairs. All of this gives the Shi a despairing feeling. The endless torrent of work and the small trickle of hope they have access to, dangling the tiniest bit out of reach. Despite all of that, they continue their trade, whether out of camaraderie or obligation. They're here for one another. Limbus almost immediately ruins all of this nuance. It takes the Planet of the Hats approach to the Shi, with a single exception. It plays on our attachment to Eugen's office for the first few 00 IDs, taking a cherry-picked few of their struggles and projecting them onto the sinners they were given to. The early Shi that we got in Limbus have some of the shortest uptie stories and only give us the surface-level ideation of overworked assassins. Plus, flavor-wise, they are very dull. While we're given the same idea of being overworked by a higher-up director, we're given little in the way to showcase the bond between the 3 to begin with. Heathcliff and Ishmael are at odds with one another, while Don is doing solo missions. At most, we're really just getting their base selves projected onto the Shi Ruiner story, but with none of the desperation, hope, or build-up offered to Eugen's branch. It's taking the most generalized idea of the Shi and regurgitating it out, copying your friend's homework and making it just different enough to pass. If this was the only piece of Shi slander here, I'd have probably given it a pass. Early Limbus, they've got to make an attractive enough roster. The Shi are a fan favorite from Ruina. Marketing and business-wise, it makes for sound logic, but the heart isn't there. Then we get their appearance in Kanto 4. They're used almost entirely just for shock value. The red line was not particularly built up to. It's just a cop-out to remove a character from the narrative that way. And while people decry that it's just the city, everyone gets a depressing story. The absence of a story here is what's frustrating, not the futility of it. To properly build up a crushing feeling of futility, more would have been required. Trene didn't need to immediately die like that. The red line is my most hated moment of Kanto 4, due to it being so nonsensical. Well, it could be reasoned that she was killed off the silencer. Why in the hell would you hire the Shi to do it for you? Everyone in the sequences following all but plays their hands clean. all of the participants are here. Dongrang and Dongbake both reveal themselves in time. There's legitimately no need for subtlety or subterfuge in this scenario. Heck, their memories get bloody wiped at the end of the Kanto. At most, haste was required. A bullet to the head or backstabbing would have been far more impactful here. Instead, we iced the narrative for a moment to give us the bare bones of the she once again. This time, Ishmael is the one to give the lowdown of, oh no, assassins, ones we can't fight, before Dongrang just changes the subject to one of internal strife. Like, it's such an asinine ending for Shrene and provides little in the way of real consequence to the narrative in the end. It doesn't make our sinners more suspect of assassination attempts, or more wary of the potential for Dante getting suddenly sliced vertically. Nothing of the sort. If I were to write a more depressing ending for her, rather a more impactful one, I'd have her take one of the regeneration ampules with the intention of decaying, plus doubling down on the fact that the two kinds of ampules are one in the same, and fast-forwarding the need for Yisang to then question Dongrang about it in the next sequence. Since Yisang's suspicions would have already been confirmed, he could have confronted Dongrang more directly rather than talking in circles quite as much. But that part is of little consequence. Due to Ishmael's previous exposure to the ampules, the moment Shrene would have injected it, while healthy, would have immediately rung alarm bells, rather than a ridiculous red line that then has to be clarified in post. Instead, all the red line does is render in concrete the impression that PM wishes to give to the she, exceedingly fast and competent assassins that the sinners have zero chance against. If later in the Kanto we then had to fight against she assassins, this would have been real solid setup for a rather scary boss encounter. But we have no such thing later. Now, all the issues outlined with the she can be mirrored to a majority of the fixer associations and officers that do manage to show up in the main story as well. The butlers and maids are loyal to a fault. Realistically, they just have to play off of our impression of combat butlers and maids from anime. The exception, of course, is Nellie, who in her existence subverts the storytelling of Wuthering Heights by being an unreliable narrator here, rather than her original, more observatory role. Josephine, though, is played rather straight into the stereotypical combat butler. The Fang Hunts are exceedingly criminal and having a singular identity crisis. They're done almost the most dirty, if anything, since they literally exist to act as a little edgy about killing blood fiends before getting absolutely demolished. This is why is a wallflower in Kanto 7, while the sink is a fucking live streamer. Okay, the last one's actually really funny and completely throws off the flowery French duelist imagery, and it also makes plenty of sense in regards to taking the other side of the duelist mentality. Proud, arrogant cunts. Why wouldn't they want to flaunt their shit? Anyway, this sin isn't all too crippling. The generalizations make room for fan interpretation and recreation. To make a E.G.O, you just need to make them decent at assassinations and potentially overworked. A 7 need to be mildly investigative, a Sink being good at duels, a Tress perhaps a gear maniac. Regardless, the room open for interpretation does allow for an audience to fit in the nuances and for Project Moon to further explore them when given the chance. Specifically, there are two instances I'd like to point to in regards to this sin being addressed or capitalized on. In the events of Kanto 6, we are treated to the appearance of the Yuffie Association. Due to how quickly they're identified and the solid image projected by the rest of the cast, we're in full belief that they are genuine contract enforcers, especially with Don's desperate insistence on their contractual enforcement methods. With ties to the ring established by the Dead Rabbit's boss, their eventual reveal as members of the ring in disguise is actually rather well set up. As a consequence of Project Moon's generalization of fixers and Don's half-baked but overly enthusiastic read on the Yuffie, we are treated to a rather solid twist when they do eventually come out as ring members. In this particular case, they've played us for fools. As for the other one I'd like to cover, it's the She Association's redemption, She-Fost. Instead of being crazy overworked or working together with desperate companions, she's being interviewed while dropping in a thinly veiled recruitment campaign for her association. It's very much like Fost, calculating and efficient. The dialogue here works multi-purpose for a majority of the lines too. We get world building, motivations, thought process, and characterization all being served through her interactions with the interviewer. The employment of bows, her reasoning for taking the interview while on the job, the interviewer calling out the She Association's troubles, all of it is rather masterfully written to feel natural and far from out of place. The writing has come a long way since that set of 00 IDs at launch. If nothing else, She-Force delivers redemption for Project Moon's sins regarding the She and showcases their capacity for more nuanced writing rather than the generic fluff they'd previously pushed with older IDs. The other sin I'd like to cover is power scaling. This is something that has been permanently fucked ever since Lobotomy Corporation. Our first exposure to the city's forces are in the rabbits and bloody colored fixers. Past there, an arbiter and claw. Like, we're starting at the literal peak of power here, but with a very specific caveat. Default deterrence. Our already exceedingly high power nuggets can stand toe-to-toe with forces far beyond their comprehension due to the influences of the facility. This, of course, applies to the abnormalities thrown at us. Already, the power scaling makes little to no sense, but since it's contained just within Lobotomy Corporation, we should be fine, right? Well, about that. Ruiner exists. We get the whole shebang from rats all the way up to distorted colors, fought off by our librarians. We should now have an idea of how strong things are in the setting now, right? And no. The library acts to grant us the powers of the lights and emotions, powering up our dudes way beyond what would normally be combatable. Couple that with the fact that librarians can fight with reckless abandon due to being able to be brought back at a whim, and none of the fights we do in the library were ever fair. While the abnormalities are now closer to their prime due to being within the perfect book for themselves, the power level of fixer associations and colors are just completely whack. Outside of the library, most fights we take in Ruiner are basically impossible to win by normal means. Without the power of lights and emotion, we'd lose 9 times out of 10, in cases where we wouldn't be afforded even a single loss. If we took on the Red Mist in her prime, we'd have been completely dusted. Same goes for the Purple Tear and Vermilion Cross. Heck, the Black Silence would have demolished every single floor if it wasn't for the library's capabilities. The final fight only makes this more and more apparent. When all the gathered light is dissipated throughout the city once more, the only combatants capable of standing up to their heads' enforcers are a full power Arbiter, the Red Mist herself, and Lowland. All of that to say, in terms of internal logic, we now at least have something of a foundation we can work with in terms of power scaling. The library gives us a rough gist of what can deal with what, right? Well, Limbus is a mess and a half here. For me, it takes until LCE checkup before we have a real indicator to the Sinner's true capabilities. Prior to that, we bumble through many fights and barely scrape our way through. At the gate in Kanto 1, we're facing off a WoW in a dilapidated Lobotomy Corp facility. Default deterrence is no longer under effect. We're hardly the kind that would be able to face off a WoW at that timing, and yet, it's a rather one-sided fight in our favor. While it can be argued that Lobotomy Corp classifications were, in regards to the abnormalities, power generation, it cannot be denied that the bus team should have been screwed the moment it popped out. Instead, we beat it to a pulp and continue onwards. None of the sinners are driven insane by it or have anything close to a mental breakdown. The audience does eventually get the emotional gut punch of Yuri though. Kanto 5 then has the most variety of power to face off against following it. We've got pirates, the Pequod, mermaids, and of course the middle. We coast through most of these, only to then get done in by the middle in spectacular fashion. Thus far does make sense. There are some things that an immortal army can't overcome, even with the odds stacked in their favor. Ricardo, at that particular junction, is one of them. The main issue is our eventual rematch against them. While 2 whole chapters have gone by, we still shouldn't be anywhere near the level to take them on during nocturnal sweeping. The major syndicates place their top members around stars of the city in terms of capability. The librarians struggle with thumb capos, index proxies, grade 1 fixers, R-Corp, and colored fixers by this timing. At most, in terms of identities, we've got things sitting around Urban Plague to Urban Nightmare levels. The Sinners are an ill fit for Ricardo, and yet they manage to fend him off regardless, and far, far more in the coming Kanto. However, that is not the only time this Intervalo commits this sin. Our Sinners have gone through a lot by the time we start Nocturnal Sweeping. Though largely unfamiliar with H-Corp, they managed to make almost every single possible blunder despite their experience and having 2 natives to the area. Hongers just lets the party get their teeth kicked in. The advice from Shi Chun falls on deaf ears, and almost any semblance of suspicion for their guide is mysteriously absent. We are literally duped by a B-grade Hong Kong movie villain. We're supposed to believe that the Sinners hadn't become more cautious over their adventure. Almost every single Kanto features some kind of betrayal or deception. Kanto 1 has them betrayed to a gas trap by fixers. Kanto 2, duped by the casino at the end in regards to getting their prize quite as easily. Kanto 3, not so much, but Kanto 4 is basically just betrayal after betrayal. Kanto 5 even. Bloody Ahab gives us a good old backstab despite Queequeg's best efforts. And 6, the whole bloody thing is betrayal, like it's actually non-stop. As for 7, we lose a sinner until they eventually come back into the fold. Like, am I really supposed to believe that the sinners are so oblivious that they're going to be duped by a random H-Corp guide? Hell, we just had Hohenheim try to obfuscate his background, and we pierced through that cleverly masterminded affair. You're having a giggle, having a wee laugh. Are you really telling me that the only sinner with deductive reasoning at this point in the story was fucking Otis? Sure, some of the rest were worried about the manager's safety after a time, hiding in his walls, for lack of a better way of putting it, but still, it breaks the suspension of disbelief if you go off to tell me that we were going to get got again. Not after this many betrayals. But while it isn't power level in the traditional sense, the level of deductive reasoning the sinners have is far too poor for when Nocturnal's sweeping was in the narrative. As for fending off sweepers, no, that one actually makes sense. Sure, there's a stupid number of them, but with H-Corp's constant shifting around, there's more than enough reasoning as to why the party can face off the swarm. Not to mention the middle is also actively contributing to thinning the horde. Anyhow, it's by the timing of Kanto 8 we start running into a stupid number of issues. So many ridiculous issues with the power scaling that we actually have to use a new Durante ability to bring things back into the fold. And even then, despite that, we still lose. The sheer loss we suffered at Lei Heng doesn't make quite as much sense after having fended off Ricardo, until we start bringing Shin and Meng into the fold. For those, you'd have needed to read Leviathan or paid enough attention to how Virgilius fights during his appearance in Kanto 6. Shin and Meng are the lazy kind of power scaling that's made to paint differentials in power levels. They paint such a sheer differential that's supposed to be impossible to overcome. They are almost always the least creative ways to differentiate levels in power, since the hard scaling leaves little to the imagination. There's no what-ifs, no buts, no theoreticals. The line is drawn in the sand that someone without Shi or Meng cannot take on someone who has it. In other media, this is Haki, Bankai, Cultivator or Adventurer levels, Domain Expansion, Level A, Quirks, Nen, etc. Okay, you know, those are all mostly modern shonen anime, but you get the idea. We're at the point where we need to differentiate the chaff from the elites by some fucking shonen power system in the bloody city. It almost seems absurd at this point. The inclusion of this kind of thing is very difficult to take back, especially when we don't have an instance of us overcoming such odds on screen yet. In the case that we ever do get an instance of beating someone who has these organically withouts, then we can live in the domain of soft counters instead, which brings back all of the fun possibilities this setting has to offer. While there's an advantage to this kind of system, mainly narrowing down and categorizing the impact members of the cast are allowed to have on the outcome of a fight, Limbus just isn't that kind of narrative. We don't have a stupid large ensemble cast with an obvious protagonist powerhouse. We don't have an Argonaut or Brave or hero figure to follow. Tales in the city are often dyed grey with nuance, rather than strictly black or white. While it isn't a bad thing for Kanto 8 to have been brighter than the rest, it does feel like they may have written themselves into more of a corner than expected through its execution. From there, the IDs we've received from this season are a mess. While we've received bosses before, most of them were ones we were closer in power to at the time. We could fight off the hungry blood fiends. We were able to face off with the Wild Hunts, even the Pequod. But the two Pinky members here? We didn't stand a chance. Yet adding them to our roster is okay. Lord Hongers and Lei Salt are messes of kits based on the bosses. They have plenty of cool shit and perhaps weakened due to coming from a mirror, but nonetheless, giving us access to those two seems like jumping the shark here. Same goes with Malforced. While we were a little more toe-to-toe with the rabbits, the one time we fight her, she's holding back in not activating any Shi or Meng. All in all, it's going to take a lot to undo the spaghetti of Project Moon's power scaling and make it something the community can actually bloody agree on. For the time being, it's full of hard lines and rigid breakpoints. The wonder that would have otherwise been present in Ruiner's classifications is pretty much destroyed with Limbus. Well, rather, starting with Leviathan, but we'll cover that trip another time. Speaking of the Blood Fiends, though, this is where the power scaling is done right. During Warp Express, we face off against Cassetti, a 6 kindred that brings W Corp to Limbus Company to handle the mess. When we come face to face with him, the sinners barely stand a chance. He's only a 6 kindred, but he brings us to our knees due to having a fresh supply of blood. He sets the bar for future Blood Fiends and what we can expect when running into them. Plus, when they come through in Kanto 7 at La Mancha Land, the expectation is foes at Cassetti's power level, only to then see that they've been starving. And that desperation, that desperate starvation, nerfs them all significantly. It's a perfect integration of lore into gameplay. with us being able to see their levels if they weren't deprived and withered when checking their statuses. It lets us know that these fights are fights that we shouldn't be winning, but due to circumstances we are allowed to triumph. When the final fight against Don Quixote Sr. comes around, we are rightly obliterated, only winning when Don is willing to step up and take on her family proper. We activate the Golden Bow Resonance and give her a fighting chance against the Senior, barely coming out on top to end the Kanto. It's an appropriate amount of setup and payoff that spans over the course of the Intervallo and Kanto itself. Last to take a personal gripe with is the Ludo narrative integration. While a lot of the time this is done quite well, there are specific parts of the CEO's stubbornness in regards to game balance that are rather disastrous. The logic behind mirror dungeons, Luxcavations, and railway make enough sense, but the sheer refusal to rebalance units for lore reasoning is what hurts the most. It's implied through Dante's notes that we are glimpsing through the mirror to communicate with these IDs, or at least take a part of them for the sinners to equip. Uptying them brings us closer to their power, with potentially catastrophic results on their mirror. However, what's to say we don't get an update to these fellas in the future? A chapter of development for those IDs. The lack thereof development within these mirrors is mildly frustrating, especially with how the most recent Uptie stories have played out. A lot of them tell different perspectives of the same world, all regarding Lord Hongers. We get some level of a future there that could be easily scaled out as required. Heck, we've gotten further glimpses in there since, rather than less, if anything. If the studio was less stubborn about keeping power levels, they take the E.G.O approach to balancing, that of which being strengthening quests. We'd get a further glimpse into the ID's mirror, followed by a strengthening of their capacity. We'd first be able to have IDs develop over time and allow the roster to get rebalanced. We could see IDs move from being in Section 5 to 3, or beyond even. Heck, in some mirrors, we see just that with the background characters. It infuriates me that they have this kind of potential and refuse to make use of it. While there are some cases of IDs getting miniature redemption arcs, sees Y. Sinclair, some others will never see this possibility. Some of that is due to the ID outright dying during their story, meaning there isn't any space left for them to grow. But that aside, a good chunk of them that need the help do have the potential. Fixers can raise their grades. The Syndicate members can move up the ranks, adjust and augment their capabilities accordingly. If you can invent a reason for XP and Freds to exist, you can sure as heck invent a reason for IDs to get strengthening quests. The people are starved for content, and you have the option for miniature updates like these. While I understand that the studio may be all hands on deck at all times considering the sheer amount of recruitment the boss tries to place out, there are levels of push and fold that should be allowed here. His vision works fine for a single player game, but as a live service there are allowances that should be made for player quality of life. If you're behind for too long, it becomes more and more annoying to catch up, even if you're being merciful by allowing everyone to shard things. Rather, they should take advantage of everyone being able to shard things. Let people get access to fun stuff. Make uninteresting IDs interesting again. You have the potential development space for it. You didn't need the entire swarm of Heishos this season and lack of E.G.Os. Heck, some more standard banners that progressed ID stories would have been cool too. If I were to ease off on this a little, give us more stories like Liu Yi-sung, the other loser in the back, and we also get to hear about where they've been in the meantime. It's fun to see little cameos of other IDs. It feeds into the lore and world building by making it feel more alive than it otherwise would have been in these static stories. Give your characters space to breathe. You've written yourself a world of infinite possibilities through the kaleidoscopic nature of the mirror. Anything could happen, you just need to grasp at it and write them in. These stories aren't voiced either. While at most another artwork may be required, a lot of depth can be garnered through text and music additions. Ultimately, this season was the biggest drag on creativity. It feels like the team had already burnt out of ideas by the time they had reached Lord Hongers. I'd wager that the moment they were told, make more Heishos beyond there, the team had already run into Heisho fatigue and wanted to do anything but those. While they used them as a storytelling engine for the mirror of Lord Hongers, having to fill out pretty much every slot with Heishos is a maddening endeavor, especially to do it all in a single season. Even our latest edition in Drifting Dayu Roshu can't escape the Heisho leash. I really hope that we get a massive spread of IDs for Kanto 9. Standard or seasonal doesn't matter, I'd just like to see some creative spark come back to the writing and design teams. You have the entire hand's worth of syndicates to choose from. More thumb support, more middle support, throw us a bone with the index, or give us another ring unit to mess with. Regardless, there's a ridiculous amount of design space that should be right about to crack open with the new year. Any of those syndicates could also give us further insight to those through their uptie stories. We can get some more middle cameos, see what kind of shit Thumb Sinclair goes through, or whether they offed themselves out of respect already. Heck, we could see Ring Sung become a maestro. That'd be a kick and a half. The possibilities are literally endless. So as an open letter to Project Moon, and more so to Kim Ji-hoon, I implore you to get your shit together. The 3 writing sins I've outlined here can be fixed. Heck, you fixed them in the past even. Planet of the Hats, She-Force story provides our exception. Power scaling issues, the Blood Fiends show us allowances warranted for narrative sensibility. And finally, the neglect of Ludo narrative integration for the older stuff. You've shown a willingness to implement some continuity. You just need to take that last step to solidify a living world of endless possibilities. I implore you to not fall into the trap of always needing to create something new, and instead develop what you already have. Many of the trappings of Kanto 8 lie in the need to introduce way too many concepts, rather than rely on things that have been set up prior. My primary concern for Kanto 9 is fuss, the lack of an intervallo past the spring cultivation to set up matters. All that said, you can't have peak without troughs. Unfortunately, troughs are often filled with slop. I pray that we don't go that direction with the new year, but if it inevitably does, I hope they manage to bounce back from rock bottom after having done so. I am cautiously optimistic for the possibilities present in Ryoshu's Kanto. While I hope Project Moon can deliver, the director's words don't offer much solace. Thanks for listening to me rattle off some of my gripes with Project Moon's writing and parts of their design philosophy. While most of my videos have taken a more positive angle thus far, I figure I should at least make use of some of my writing credentials from time to time. We'll be back to ID compositions next. The CCA Heathcliff video is being worked on. I'm not running away from that one, I swear. Nonetheless, if you'd like to disagree with me, feel free to do so civilly in the comments below. I do read all of them, even that ridiculously long one posted on LCE Force's video. As for whether or not I'll fully address them, we'll see if I ever do a follow-up on this. Again, thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you like the content or wish to see any more in the future. Thanks.